that just do not make sense. Like why there's so few believers on the firing line, while so many others sit the fence. But if you want to know where the Word of God stands, and believe it wants to use your feet and hands, it's time to take your faith out of the seats and into the streets, and come along with me. If you only look, then you will see on WCNTV.
Welcome to WCNTV. Today is March 25th, 2020, day one of the hostage crisis here in Wisconsin. We're all on lockdown like so many other states. Crazy times we're living in. We're going to be joined here shortly by a good friend of ours, evangelist Jason Storms. He's with Missionaries to the Preborn, and he's also the assistant director at Operation Save America. Should be a good show. We have Jason is a bivocational person. He works a full-time job in residential contracting. He's also an evangelist and a pastor. And I'm going to let him give you his testimony, but he also married my daughter, by the way. Didn't marry my daughter, but he married my daughter and her husband. So that was kind of cool. About a year and a half ago. Jason, how you doing?
Great to be with you, Rob.
Thanks for coming in. I know it's a busy day for everybody today.
Yes, it is. Interesting day.
So why don't we start off, if you would, just kind of give us your testimony. I know you've had kind of a rocky road throughout your life, but you came back home as a prodigal son at 19, but maybe you can kind of give us a brief history on Jason Storms.
Yeah, well, I was raised like a lot of folks. My parents were products of the 70s, and so, sex, drugs, rock and roll ruled the day. They had 2 kids as teenagers that they couldn't take care of, and they married for a short period of time and then divorced. And so, my mom raised me and my brother as a single mom, and my dad became a Christian when I was young. And so when I'd visit him, he moved to New Orleans when I was 5. We were all from upstate New York, but he moved to New Orleans when I was 5. I'd go visit him and would get a taste of genuine Christianity, but was raised in a very non-Christian home. And so, living with a single mom, we moved around a lot, moved from small towns to big cities, wound up in San Jose, California, my senior year of high school, and had renounced Christ sort of officially at 14. I would say at that age, I just said, Christianity doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Had a lot of questions that were not getting answered. Of course, hormones began to be raging, and I just said, I don't really want to live according to the teachings of the Bible. So high school was just sort of a downward spiral. I think I was more mature when I started high school at 14, when I graduated at 17. And, I just think that, it's very difficult for a young person to grow up in the culture in which we find ourselves. And it's just gotten increasingly difficult with technology, with all the seductions and all of the influences that just bombard a young person. I was raised in the gangster rap music scene, listening to the band NWA at 10 years old, rapping about, literally robbing and killing and raping. And, that stuff is just so vile and perverse. And so that's sort of where my identity as a man was centered, and that's what sort of where I learned how to be a man, what manhood was all about. It was measured as a teenager by, how many women you could sort of conquer, how much you could consume in terms of drugs and alcohol, how tough you thought you were. These were the measures of a man. in my estimation. So it wasn't until at 18 years old I was had finished high school, had gotten into a lot of very heavy drugs, and was basically a homeless bum, and I couldn't hold down a job, and realized that I was not in a good place. My dad reached out to me, offered me a fresh start in New Orleans to move down there with him, and I knew I needed a change. And it was, 4 days. He bought me a bus ticket, 4 days on the Greyhound bus. I spent my 19th birthday on the Greyhound bus somewhere in Texas. And so a long bus ride to just reflect and be sober and to think about life. And God was really just convicting me of my sin and showing me my need for a Savior. So I got to New Orleans, and the first night I got in there with my dad, he was having a Bible study at the house at his apartment there. And just the words of the scripture were jumping off the page at me. I was so impressed with just the sincerity, the humility of the people. And, growing up, everything around me was fake. We live in just a fake world. Everything is plastic. Everything is cheap. Everything is replaceable. And relationships and people oftentimes are the same. Our spirituality is oftentimes cheap and superficial. Our entertainment, our food, our relationships. And I looked to the institutions of power and authority in my life, and they had all failed me. The education system I thought was a joke. It wasn't educating me. I saw it as a system of indoctrination. I didn't like public school, didn't like being in school, didn't feel like I was learning anything, was always getting into trouble, and was so happy when I got out of school. And of course, I saw my government as corrupt. I saw the media as corrupt. I saw, the family structure broken down. I saw the religious institutions corrupt and broken down. So, as a young person growing up in our culture, it's like, where do you turn for truth? Where do you really turn to find something that's authentic and genuine and real? And so for me, that was Christ. It was opening up the scriptures and seeing Jesus, and then seeing some authentic, genuine Christian believers. And that was transformational to me. So at 19 years old, I had a lot of questions for my dad, and we would stay up till 2, 3 in the morning just talking every night. And he just patiently would talk through my questions and answer my questions for me, presented the rational side of Christianity and gave a reasoned defense of the faith, and just talked through the struggles I was having. And of course, I began to just read, became a vociferous reader, and pulling books off of his shelf and just studying and just realizing, like a lot of my friends growing up in broken homes, we said, why is the world so screwed up, And so what I began to realize is that these things that were going on in our culture, many of the things that the drug culture, the breakdown of the family, the sort of spiritual vacuum and the spiritual void that exists amongst young people today was all intentional. Began to realize, the 1960s really turned our culture upside down. We went from God, family, country to sex, drugs, rock and roll. Do whatever makes you feel good. We went from sacrificial Christian love being the standard of morality to, hey, consume and just get whatever you can and live your life to the fullest. It's all about you. And it's been absolutely catastrophic. We've aborted, 60 million little innocent human beings. And sadly, I had a girlfriend who participated in that, and I was consenting to that at 18 years old. And so we have just grown, become an increasingly self-centered culture. Not to say America was ever some grand, glorious nation at any time. We've always, had certainly national sins and problems, but there's been a design and deliberate and intentional destruction of the moral foundations and the spiritual foundations of this nation, and millions of young people today are suffering under the weight of that spiritual void. And what that means to me really is that the harvest is plentiful, as Jesus said, right? But the laborers are few. There's millions of young people walking the streets of America who never heard the gospel, who are open to listening if we will be bold, and if we'll have enough love to go and to preach the gospel, to bring the gospel to those who are never going to step foot into our churches. And so, I immediately became very passionate as an evangelist, going to the streets, reaching out to all, of course, my old friends, and reaching out to young people. And New Orleans is a rough city, and so began to go out to the streets of New Orleans, the French Quarter, Bourbon Street, and share the gospel. And God began to teach me a lot. As you go out and are used of the Lord, He begins to really sanctify and mold you and shape you and use you and teach you in profound ways. I think a lot of Christians don't ever really experience the excitement, the adventure, and the growth process that comes with living, real Christian life, because they're not really engaged in the battle. And when you're not really engaged in the battle, you don't get involved, then Christianity just becomes a boring kind of thing. And that's unfortunate. So many people are sitting in the church pew with gifts and with talents that are just lying dormant. And so God began to use me as an evangelist in that way, and began to give me a heart for evangelism and reaching people, and then just kind of went off from there and jumped into full-time ministry at 22 years old after about 3.5 years of being discipled down in New Orleans, learning how to be a man, learning how to work hard, learning how to be responsible, learning how to treat and honor and respect women, all these kinds of things. And so, yeah, here I am now. Fast forward 20 years, and God has blessed me with a beautiful wife and 9 children, a business, being an associate pastor at our church, being involved in pro-life ministry for many years. And so just am blessed that God uses me despite myself many times, and even as He still works on me and sanctifies me. And it's good to serve God. So that's a very brief synopsis of my testimony.
Well, it's very obvious that God has had His hand upon you throughout your life, and it's wonderful that you had a dad that, like you did, because so many times parents today just kind of drop their kids off at the church and expect the church to mentor them and raise them spiritually. So, and that it really does make a major difference when people see the real thing compared to, like you said, plastic churchianity.
Yeah,
It has a huge impact. And it also has a huge impact when you're actually able to use your gifts. You're actually asked to do something with, you were saved to serve, we
yeah.
always say. So,
Amen.
but yeah, so you've got 9 kids, married to Pastor Matt Truella's daughter. Matt's been on the show before.
Yeah,
And
he's been a great mentor to me.
yeah. So did you meet Matt first, or did you meet his daughter first?
I actually met Sarah first,
Okay.
but I heard about Matt first. So, I actually, me and a friend of mine from New Orleans, we quit our jobs and began to preach on the streets full time when we were both 22 years old. We met in community college down there, and I was working construction, going to community college at night, and he was doing the same. And first real solid Christian I met, young man, I say young solid Christian, my own age. Most of the guys I was hanging out with in my church were older guys, and that was probably good. I got away from a lot of younger people. And one of the best things a young man can do is get around older men who you can just develop relationships with, and friendships, and learn how to think like a more mature man. And so, but first like young solid Christian guy I met, I was 21. Actually, I think I was still 20. And so he and I became roommates down there, and then we went into ministry full time, preaching on the streets. We've been traveling the country. We go to universities, we go to abortion clinics, we go to just drive into a big city, go downtown, find a rough area, just get out and start sharing the gospel. And God would just use us mightily. It just would be amazing and miracles every day. I mean, we were young, naive, incompetent. It wasn't because we were anything special by any means, but we just had a desire to go and share the gospel, and let God use us in that way. And He did amazingly, and He provided for us. And so in the midst of that, abortion ministry was very, very important part of our life. My dad was very involved in pro-life work in New Orleans. Took me out to an abortion clinic, shortly after I became a Christian 22 years ago. And so my heart was immediately broken over that, and seeing, the injustice and what takes place at abortion clinics, and seeing little human beings torn apart in their mother's womb, and just, the place that should be the place of great protection, where a little child is valued, to see what happens with abortion. It's just a horrific national sin. So we would do a lot of pro-life work as well as we would travel. And of course, the gospel and the pro-life work we did were inseparable. We stood against abortion because we were Christians, because there is a God, and God says, "Thou shalt not murder," and life derives its value from God. So we preach and we proclaim this message because of the gospel. And so we didn't separate our pro-life work from our faith, right? And so in the midst of that, we met several folks who told me about Matt Truella, Missionaries to the Preborn, and just told us, hey, these guys are fantastic, very like-minded, really solid, really gospel-centered, no compromise kinds of guys that are out on the streets. And so we got to hook up with Matt and went on a campus ministry tour with them. And through that, of course, I heard about Sarah Truella. People mentioned, you should meet Sarah Truella too. So Sarah and I met and hit it off, and we got married. And so yeah, so it was really the work that Matt had did, his reputation around the country, that I heard of him and wanted to get involved with what they were doing. And so now I've been involved with Missionaries of the Preborn for almost 20 years.
And you do have a beautiful family, Jason. Yeah, so when we originally had scheduled you for the program, the intent was to talk about the upcoming campus tour
Yeah.
that Missionaries of the Preborn does every spring. That actually was scheduled for later in April. But obviously, now that all the colleges are closed, are you rescheduling? Are you looking at doing this in the fall now, or?
Yeah, we're going to be doing it in the fall. So yes, the spring is out. Obviously, campuses, universities have all closed down, so it's not even really an option. But we will be doing it in the fall, and we generally do a fall one anyway. So this we'll just have more bang for our buck in the fall, Lord willing. So yeah, usually it's late September or early October, and then we have a spring one, usually in mid to late April, and we'll do 4 days at 4 different universities in the state. Last year we were at UW Whitewater, UW Oshkosh, UW Milwaukee, and where else did we go? I think we were in UW La Crosse. Made it across the state to La Crosse. So, year before that, we're in Stevens Point, up in your neck of the woods.
Yeah, I was actually with you. We did a joint effort 2 years ago with Operation Save America.
Excellent. Yes, that's right. Yep.
And so I was able to observe you do your thing on the campus there at Stevens Point. That was I wish we had some video of that, but I don't think we do. But we have other videos we can show. Jared, do you have anything queued up ready to go that we can give the folks some examples of what Jason actually does out there on the at the schools? Yeah. Why don't we take a look at that, and then maybe Jason, since neither one of us have actually seen what he's about to show us, you can kind of tell us about it. So
sounds good. Yeah, this is old. This is from about 12 years ago.
Is it? Okay. Wow.
We're not good at uploading.
You need to update your website.
We really do. We really do. We're terrible at
Actually, just so you know, you appear in the video footage on the intro of our show. So.
Oh, okay. Good to know.
And that photo is taken at UW Stevens Point.
Okay.
It was October of 2018. So.
Very good. Yeah, that was a great outcome of outreach. I think Coach Dave was up there with us. So I remember we had a nice little crowd.
Yeah.
We were interacting with there. Yeah, it was very good.
Yeah, and the students are willing to talk, and they're willing to debate with you. And we saw some minds change that day.
We did, yeah.
This is unless you go to them, they're never going to get an alternative view of what, other than what they're being told in school.
Absolutely.
So, well, let's take a look, Jared, if you're ready.
We get our rights from? George Bush? Bill Clinton? The majority? Mom and Dad? No, we get our rights and we get our value from God, our Creator. That's where Declaration of Independence is.
I don't believe in God, so you're going to tell me I'm wrong about that too?
Yes, I would say that you're wrong about that.
All right, thank you. I think that's very...
Yeah, our Declaration of Independence, America was built upon, isn't perfect as it's been. We can all agree America's been very perfect. But it established at least something very good that's
What
made
about international
a great nation that's blessed many other nations throughout history. And because we had one little principle in our founding document, philosophy, that our rights come from God, the Creator. And they don't come from the will of the majority. They don't come from a tyrannical state. They don't come from the majority. But everybody, even minorities, they have rights. They deserve protection and they deserve defense.
But not if they're not Christian.
I never said that. If you think that, that's your opinion. I didn't say that. That's why people from all over the world came to America. From other religions. That's why there's Muslims in this country. Hindus, Buddhists. That's why there's many atheists in our country. Because though we identified as a nation that God is foundational to our freedoms, because we recognize the human worth of all people, because we recognize we're all made in God's image, we say that an atheist has value. A Buddhist has value. A Hindu has value because we're all made in God's image. That doesn't mean all of our ideas are equal. It doesn't mean all of our beliefs are equal. There's bad ideas. There's bad beliefs. Religions that say throw virgins into volcanoes to appease the sun god. I don't think that that's a position we should say it has to be respected equally. Ideas, there's lots of bad ideas. Many in our society criticize Christianity. I welcome that. No Christian would really want you to just blindly believe in Christianity. Christianity, true Christianity, encourages rational thought, a faith that's built upon reason and evidence and knowledge.
Reason, evidence, and knowledge.
Yes, ma'am.
Where is this evidence?
Where is the evidence for God coming from?
Yes.
Well, the biggest evidence that I have for God is my personal relationship with Him. The things that He's done in my life and me experiencing His presence. Now, obviously, it's not something I can prove to you, but I prove it to myself. So my belief is rationally justified. Now, other evidence that I could appeal to is, well, the creation of the world around us, the order and the harmony of the world around us, the complexity of systems and organisms around us that clearly could not have come into existence by random chance. Any more than a hurricane can swirl around a junkyard for a few million years and you're going to get a Boeing 747. That's not going to happen. And that's how many atheists are with the evidence for God. They don't want evidence for God. They run from evidence for God because evidence for God is going to mean that they're morally accountable for their choices.
Okay, so that was, I guess all of these are going to be about 12 years old, right, Jason?
Yeah.
Okay.
I know. I've uploaded videos in a long time. Other people upload a lot of videos of us doing our thing, but I'm terrible at filming and promoting some of what we do. But yeah, that's a little sample and a little snippet of kind of what it's like. You know, you go out there, we get signs, and in literature, we distribute thousands of pieces of literature on a campus, and I will open air preach, and I try to open air preach. You know, a lot of people don't like open air preaching. They think it's offensive and that it's going to turn people off. And there is a lot of bad open air preaching. There are a lot of open air preachers that I think are, turning people off and doing a poor job. But as a method, the method is biblical. You see open air preaching all throughout the Bible. The prophets open air preached, Jesus open air preached, Paul open air preached, and you see it all throughout church history. Great open air preachers from John Wesley and George Whitefield, back to some of the reformers in the time of the Reformation, back through even like Saint Francis Assisi was this open air preaching, right? Go all throughout the middle. You study church history, you find that God has used bold open air preaching. It's you see it Peter on the day of Pentecost. What does he do when the Holy Spirit comes upon him? Pentecostals would say it's the initial evidence of the Holy Spirit is speaking in tongues. I would say the initial evidence of the Holy Spirit is boldness. That's what we see in the Bible, right? God, the Holy Spirit comes upon Peter and the apostles. What do? They go right in the middle of Jerusalem. This very hostile crowd that just a very short time prior, had crucified their Lord, and he goes and preaches this bold sermon to them, convicting them, and 3,000 are saved in that day. And so open air preaching is biblical when done biblically. Of course, biblically, the Bible eschews pride, arrogance, haughtiness. We shouldn't go out and come across as arrogant or haughty in our preaching and in our evangelism. We shouldn't be fake or phony. We should be well studied and be able to give an answer to everyone who asks us a reason for the hope that is within us. We should be able to give good reasons for why do we believe what we believe. These students are going to ask questions. They're going to have doubts, and we've got to be patient, long-suffering, gentle, but also bold and strong. And God blesses open air preaching when it's done that way. And so we get, oftentimes crowds gather around and they want to debate, they want to discuss. As you can see, we had a lot of people just standing around listening. People would raise their hands and they'll ask questions, and people want to have these conversations. People skip class to sit and listen to these exchanges and these dialogues. And of course, then not everybody in our group is an open air preacher. Not everybody is gifted in that way or has that skill set. But a lot of other people in our group, particularly when we ran our ministry school for many years, young people would just sit off to the sideline and have conversations. You have all kinds of opportunities. Well, a crowd like that gathers, sometimes as many as 100 to 200 people gather around, and off sort of on the sidelines, people engage in conversations, and students are willing to talk. They're willing to talk about all the most important issues, their eternal soul, and who is God, and all these things. And so it's a mission field. Universities in our country are mission fields.
And having seen you in action, Jason, I can testify that you are anything but fake, and I think that really comes across and resonates with the students, and that's probably why one of the reasons why you're so successful communicating with them. But so this was 12 years ago that we just showed. You do this all the time. Have you seen a change in the students that you're approaching now as compared to even 12 years ago?
It's hard to say. Sometimes I think maybe I'm just getting old. There's that old proverbial thing about the old guys who are sort of just, you look at the young guys, you're just like, oh Lord help us.
Mm,
But things were bad 20 years ago. I mean, the LGBT stuff was everywhere. I was arrested several times for preaching. First few times I was arrested as a Christian was 20, 19, 18 years ago, preaching at LGBT pride gatherings, and so, I think things are different. I think there continues to be this growing sense in our culture that you cannot confront bad ideas.
hmm
There's a growing sense in our culture that it's rude, it's arrogant to make strong assertions about what is right and wrong. Now, of course, those who think this way make assertions and confront things they don't like all the time. So there's also this increasingly glaring hypocrisy, particularly amongst liberals in our culture, but not just liberals. There's a lot of conservative folks who are not Christians who you can preach the gospel to, and they're going to get angry with you when you touch on their pet sins. This is why as Christians we're not, we're not wed to a political party. I tend to vote Republican. I've always voted Republican. I've never voted for a Democrat. I've never seen voting for a Democrat,
I
but
don't see how a
but
Christian could actually, but
no, I don't think so either. But that being said, certainly if we're going to be salt and light, we're going to be faithful to Christ. We have to be willing to say hard things to our Republican friends and colleagues, because there's certainly problems in the Republican Party that that it's not the party of Jesus Christ by any stretch. I think that what we see in our culture is, but it is particularly on the left amongst liberals in our society, and universities are a bastion of liberalism. Young people are indoctrinated in liberalism, heavily. There's an anti-Christian, anti-conservative component there. Conservative Christians are frequently, ridiculed, mocked, um, intimidated, bullied, and so on. So we love to go there and push back against all that, and let conservative Christian students know that you don't have to get pushed around by the administration. You don't have to get pushed around by their students. That you can boldly defend your ideas in the public square and win. And we win debates. We've debated professors. Professors have come out and we've debated professors in the public square where they can't use the bully pulpit of their classroom, where your grade is contingent upon what they think about you, right? Out in the public arena, they have to defend their ideas on a level playing field, and I've had the joy, I would say, of deconstructing a lot of leftist ideology in front of a large crowd of students, and that's powerful. You see young people's whole system of thinking break down in front of your eyes, and they begin to question everything and think, well, maybe the things I've been taught about Christianity are not true. Maybe this idea, I mean, you literally have university professors teaching. I mean, it doesn't matter where you go. UW Milwaukee, our local university, Stevens Point, there are dozens of professors who are teaching thousands of kids that Christianity is a make-believe religion that has killed more people in the world than any other religion, that Christianity has nothing but a history of violence and oppression against women and slavery and all these kinds of things. And that's their conception of Christianity. They will bring up the Crusades, they will bring up the Inquisitions, they will bring up slavery, they'll bring up the Salem witch trials, and they have no idea the history of Christianity. They have no idea that the vast majority of things they take for granted in the world today are the result of Christianity and what Christianity has built into Western civilization. The whole notion of human value, intrinsic human value, is a uniquely Christian idea. You don't find that in the ancient pagan world. You certainly didn't find that in the ancient Greco-Roman world. That's a uniquely Judeo-Christian idea that was brought to the Western world that we take for granted today. Liberals take for granted today, right? They all think that they have value. They're all very concerned about their rights. Well, where do their rights come from? You ask a liberal, why do you have value? If you're just an animal, you're just a random product of evolution. If you are no different, ontologically than, a mosquito, a rat, a blade of grass, what's the difference? If I'm mowing the lawn, did it, and thousands of blades of grass have their heads chopped off? Is that anything wrong with it? So what's different than Mao Zedong in the name of communism and atheism murdering 50 million people, or Joseph Stalin murdering 20 million people? Um, what makes something right or wrong, right? And so this is the problem that liberals have, is that they have a completely artificial worldview that is utterly morally bankrupt, irrational. And so they want to judge Christians and say Christians are bigoted, Christians are hateful, and yet they have no basis on which to even stand and make moral judgments. Because when we make moral judgments and we begin to present our views and say, well, biologically, sex is reproductive and it should be kept within the confines of reproductive activity between a biological male and a biological female. That's what's best for producing and then raising children, that kind of committed thing that we call marriage. They're going to push back against that and say you're being judgmental and narrow and imposing your morality. And yet, of course, we see they impose their morality all the time, right? They'll turn around then and say we're engaging in hate speech and we should not be allowed to engage in the types of things that we're saying. They'll turn around and say that, we're bigots and that our churches, if we don't, this is what's coming, of course, as you well know, that if our churches are not going to perform homosexual marriages, we will be stripped of, tax exemption, state licensure. Christian colleges are going to be stripped of accreditation. Christian counselors are going to be stripped of licensure. This is what's coming down the pike. And of course, I've been saying this for 20 years. Many people have been saying this for longer than 20 years, seeing where we're headed as a society, that these things, this is where this will lead. This is where this ideology, which it is an ideology, this liberal, secular, humanist ideology, this is where it will lead. It will lead to the sort of tyranny we saw in amongst the Soviets and amongst the communists in China. It will lead to that, and of course many of us have been sounding this alarm and giving this warning of where these ideas will lead to, and it is sad. So all that to say, going back to the original question, have I seen changes? Yeah, there's a lot that's changed in the last 20 years. I think we've gone much deeper into the rabbit hole of moral relativism, of leftist ideology. There's been some pushback for sure, that's been good and positive. Trump's election, I think, was a sign of some good things, with regards to people being fed up with the radical liberalism being imposed on us and the lies of the media, these kinds of things. But I guess one thing that's changed and that makes is that people are less inclined to want to have rational discourse. And so actually sitting down and having an intelligent conversation, trying to exchange ideas, and without the conversation getting emotional, without it getting personal, without people just freaking out, that becomes more and more difficult. So that's one of the arts of open air preaching when we go to the campus, is how to keep a crowd like that calm, to keep the dialogue. There's certain things I do as techniques to sort of crowd control, and some sort of like police tactics, de-escalation tactics. When you get some loud heckler that wants to scream, some angry feminist or some person like that wants to scream and yell and shout you down, learning how to control that situation, not let it escalate, and maintain a situation where you can communicate with a large audience effectively. That's some of the neat stuff that I've learned over the years and that we try to employ.
Well, I think they get angry because they really don't have a leg to stand on when it comes to, like you said, moral relativism. And you can really what you say makes sense, and it hits them emotionally, and they lash out, they respond. It's like a trapped animal, because they really have no argument to come back with. So, but Jared, can we take a look at one more video there? From now, I think this is from a different school. I thought you had one from Iowa.
I think this is Pennsylvania here.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I made these videos a long time ago with my very limited technological.
Well, technology has
abilities.
improved.
It has. It's gotten easier to do. So yeah, we have a lot of footage, and there's a lot of footage. But I need to do a better job of. Well, this is just a kind of more of a picture slideshow of some of our campus ministry outreach.
Okay. Yeah, let's do the other one so we get some interaction in there.
right? The Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident. We're all endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights. Endowed by our Creator. Life, liberty, pursuit, happiness. So we get our rights from God, and He is our authority, and we have freedom to do what is right. Abraham Lincoln said it best. He said, "We don't have the freedom to do that which is wrong. Nobody has the right to do that which is wrong. God gives us freedom to love Him." All atheists would reject that position, right?
Yeah, I don't believe that God created me. I don't believe that I was born a sinner. I don't believe in any desert wanderer scribblings 2,000 years ago. I don't believe it.
Understood. So when I say the atheist belief system, I'm talking about common beliefs that come with the package. When you reject God, you reject all the things you just said and many more things. One of those things would be what the Bible affirms, that we're made in God's image, that we therefore should love one another as Christ commands us to love one another. And secondly, that we have dignity and value as human beings, no matter how big or how small, what color our skin is, or how much we can contribute to society. This is precisely the reason that the 20th century was the bloodiest century in human history. Atheistic regimes in China, the Soviet Union, Cambodia, Cuba, that rejected the Christian scriptures, rejected the knowledge of God, rejected the Christian heritage that many of them were given, adopted atheism and communism. They massacred millions of their own people in good conscience because they said this is the evolution of the species. And that's what matters. Christians fought against that, following the teachings of Jesus, saying God commands us to lay our life down for one another, love our neighbors ourselves. There's a fundamental difference there.
Brother apart from the Savior today.
Well, you definitely have a gift there, Jason. And
Thank you.
I should mention that now these were titled Faithful Soldier School of Evangelism. Is that something you're still doing?
No, we stopped our ministry school. We ran a full semester training and discipleship program for 5 months, and we would train young people that would come stay with us. We'd have housing around the Milwaukee area, and we'd have classes, formal training, biblical training, basic biblical studies, basic biblical theology, and then we would do apologetics training, and then take them out on the streets and to do real evangelism. And so we did that for 10 years, and then I took off about 5 years ago as my family got large. I went back to school myself, actually went and got my master's degree. And then so we haven't been doing that for the last 5 years. We still do a summer camp, and we have a Faithful Soldier summer camp. So it's still kind of like a evangelism wing of our local church, Mercy Seat Church, but we don't do our training program anymore.
So how would people get involved in that if they're interested, and when does it take place?
Our website, we still have the website, faithfulsoldier.com, and it's linked to our church, mercyseat.net. And so that would be a good place to go. Check out our church, mercyseat.net. And then, we do a lot of training. Missionaries to the Preborn, of course, is another website that, we do a lot of that's where we do a lot of our work against abortion, fighting abortion. And, Operation Save America that we work with also. We do a lot of, joint collaborative efforts around the country. And so all good sites and good organizations to look into, get involved with. And, of course, there's a lot of overlap. You've worked with all those groups. We've come and worked with you. So, we're big on ministries collaborating together and working together. And yeah, I think that what we need is just too many Christians sitting on the sidelines, right? Too many Christians that,
I have a hard time even using that word anymore, really, Jason, because it's, it's churchianity versus Christianity, really. But you also work with OSA, Operation Save America. Maybe you want to tell us a little bit about what you have planned for this summer in Oklahoma.
Yeah, well, what do we have planned?
Yeah,
Because
I guess it's hard to know right now, isn't it?
yeah. I mean, that's everything's up in the air. They just, Summerfest, our big music festival at the end of June, has just been pushed back to September. So I don't know. It was going to be, normally it's in mid-July. We were moving it up to late June this year in Oklahoma. We were going to be doing a lot of outreach with several different organizations in Oklahoma, and that's all, I guess, up in the air as of right now. We were just down there for our regional leadership meeting that we did, coincided with Free the States conference, and there was a lot of groups came from around the country. So we work and trying to bring unity to a lot of different groups, trying to bring different groups together from around the country around a more principled approach to fighting abortion. For too long, we've allowed sort of the mainstream pro-life movement has sort of been wed to I would say, the compromised sort of rhino GOP leadership. And so consequently, we those of us who've been fighting against abortion for many years have been really disappointed with the reality that we win a lot of elections. We see pro-lifers abound in our halls of government, and yet we see very little substantive change in terms of policy. You think about George Bush when he was president, from the year 2000 to 2008. 6 of those 8 years, the Republicans, pro-life Republicans, controlled all 3 branches of our federal government, and were in the majority in the majority of states. And yet, just as many babies died under George Bush as had died under, as died under Barack Obama. So, and Planned Parenthood continued to receive hundreds of millions of dollars a year, both from the federal government as well as the additional millions that are giving in all these states. So, when Donald Trump was elected in 2016, we had, Republicans controlled, again, all 3 branches of the federal government for the first 2 years of Trump's administration. And pro-life Republicans were in control of 32 state governments. So we had all 3 branches of the federal government, 32 state governments, and yet just as many babies died as had died under Barack Obama. And so if that's what pro-life means, then there's a problem. So I think you say, well, how could that be? How could our pro-life leaders be failing right, so badly? Because if you look at a lot of pro-life organizations, they're not saying they're failing. They're actually saying they're winning. They're saying things are getting better. There's less abortion clinics. There's less abortions being performed. Right. This is some of the rhetoric. That we've got. We're saving lives. We're passing incremental bills that are saving lives. But the sad reality is that the incremental bills that we're passing, we're actually not really saving any lives. There's zero evidence that we're saving any lives with incremental bills we're passing. You have two kinds of incremental bills that get passed. You get ones that pass the sort of courts that are in compliance with Roe versus Wade. For example, we passed a ban on 20-week abortions in Wisconsin 2 years ago, and that was National Right to Life's big legislative policy agenda from 2 years ago, was to pass a bill that would ban abortions after 20 weeks. Now, there were all kind of exceptions in this, right? So it wasn't even just a hard ban on abortions after 20 weeks. There was all sorts of exceptions to this. So, there's reasons women could still go and get an abortion after 20 weeks. But, you think, that held up to the Constitution. The reason it did is because the courts said this didn't impose, quote, any undue burden on Roe, unquote. That's what the courts have ruled. So the courts have essentially said that any legislative thing that's passed, it cannot impose an undue burden on a woman's right to an abortion. So everything that we're passing incrementally, from the very start, we're already accepting the premise that the courts are legitimate in this ruling of Roe versus Wade and all the subsequent rulings that have come along with it, Doe versus Bolton and Casey in 1992. And so if we accept that notion that the court's ruling on abortion is legitimate, and we seek to work within that Roe paradigm, then everything we do legislatively is going to guarantee from the outset that it will not significantly interfere with a woman's right to an abortion. And so that's the legislative strategy. That's the legislative strategy of the pro-life groups. But it doesn't sound very good if you're leading a pro-life organization and you're saying, and you're trying to raise money and you're trying to do something. It doesn't sound good to say, guys, look, our legislative strategy is guaranteed not really to save any lives, not really to restrict abortion in any significant way. That's bad, right? So, then more principled pro-life groups are trying to do things to try to push for the overturn of Roe. They're trying to push things through the courts that will trigger a challenge. That's like the Heartbeat bill was trying to do this. other bills that I would say were more meaty, if you will. But the problem with all these bills, of course, is they get struck down by the courts, and none of them yet has been successful. I don't think any of them will be successful in overturning Roe. Out of the 9 Supreme Court justices we have, 5 of them are quote unquote conservative, appointed by pro-life presidents. Only one of those 5 has publicly gone on record saying that Roe versus Wade should be overturned, and it's Clarence Thomas. Clarence Thomas has asked the other 4 to sign on along with him to a statement saying that Roe versus Wade is illegitimate and needs to be overturned, and none of the other 4 have been willing to do that. So here we are, 3 years into Trump's administration with the 2 picks that he gave, and still Roe versus Wade has not been overturned, and there's no foreseeable indication that that's going to happen anytime soon. So thousands of babies are going to continue to die this year and next year, and if Trump wins re-election, thousands of babies are going to continue to die. So what we've been working on as a strategy is to say, that the courts are not the final arbiter of what is right and wrong, but rather that we have a system of checks and balances, right? All branches of government there's checks and balances there. The courts don't just get to make stuff up, just like the president can't just make stuff up, right? He has executive limitations. The legislative branch, there's certain things, the legislative branch can't just pass a law that says nobody has any more rights. I mean, or that you can kill somebody over the age of 60. I mean, they can, but they don't have the authority, right? Other branches of government would need to stand up to them and say, you can't do that. That's wrong. And this happens all the time, right? Where a court strikes down a legislature, or a president ignores a law, or where states ignore what the federal government is saying, right? This happens frequently. It's happening right now with marijuana usage, sanctuary cities. They did it with homosexual marriage. Of course, many states are saying they would defy the federal government over gun registry or gun confiscation. Many governors have come out and said that there's no way that they're going to, when Obama was president and they were talking about strict gun control, lots of states said, we're not going to abide by that. You're not going to do that in our state. We're not going to enforce that, right? And so that's the nature of the kind of government we have, representative government, where there's different jurisdictions, different layers and levels of government that need to provide checks and balances because they're all prone to abusing their power. Right. And so what happened is the courts have been the vehicle that liberals have used to impose much of their agenda on the population for the last 40 plus years, really last probably closer to 100 years. They've circumvented the democratic process, right? Abortion, they weren't seeking a constitutional amendment. A lot of pro-lifers are seeking a constitutional amendment affirming the value of unborn child. I would say we don't need a constitutional amendment. When the Constitution was written and framed, unborn children were in the purview of the founders and framers of the Constitution. And so unborn children were protected in this country legally, right, up until the Roe versus Wade decision. But what did the liberals do? The liberals didn't pass a constitutional amendment giving women a right to choose. They had to do that with a woman's right to vote. Before women were granted the right to vote, they had to pass a constitutional amendment. But with abortion, they knew they couldn't. They weren't anywhere near having the votes to pass a constitutional amendment to legitimize abortions. What did they do? They circumvented the democratic process. They just imposed it via the Supreme Court. They were able to get a majority in the court that just imposed that on all 50 states. A massive, gross usurpation of power, unconstitutional, unjust act that has led to 60 million babies dead. And so what should have happened is governors all across this country should have said, no, we're not going to enforce that. The president at that time should have said, we're not going to enforce that. Absolutely not. Ronald Reagan, when he was elected in 1980, should have said, we're not going to enforce that. Just the same, it's exactly what Barack Obama did with the DOMA bill, right? When the Defense of Marriage Act, which was passed and signed by Clinton. Barack Obama just simply said, we're not going to enforce that. States are free to legalize gay marriage, and 13 states under Obama legalized homosexual marriage. And then you had, of course, 36 states passed amendments to their state constitutions prohibiting homosexual marriage. What did the courts do? Yeah, the courts just made an absurd, outrageous, ridiculous, unprecedented ruling saying, no, homosexual marriage is going to be legal here.
Yeah, it was crazy. During the last election, we had I think 17 Republican candidates up on stage, and they had just done the Obergefell thing, and not one of those candidates had the 5th grade civics class knowledge to know that courts don't make law or have the courage to say that. Yep. So, I mean, they were asked directly, and not one of them would say it.
No, Ted Cruz and Rand Paul had said it previously. when it came down. But yeah, when they were on the campaign trail, no, that they suddenly were no longer saying that. So, but Ted Cruz has been on record making that argument, as has Rand Paul. So that knowledge is there. People know it, but what it really comes down to is a question of courage, right? Even here in our state of Wisconsin, when we had Republican majorities here, it comes down to courage. Are we willing to stand up and take this stand? Now, I know that's a tough stand. If Walker had just simply said, we're not going to respect the Roe versus Wade decision, it was an absurdity. We're not going to respect the Obergefell decision, it was an absurdity. That would have definitely created some massive blowback in Milwaukee and Madison in particular. So we got to be prepared for that fight. I think what is needed is, you take a state like Oklahoma, and this is why with OSA we're targeting Oklahoma. Oklahoma is a state that is 80% pro-life. Pro-life Republicans have overwhelming majority down there, right? We're more of a purple state really here in Wisconsin, although I think conservatives have a slight edge numerically, but we tend to be a little more quiet and a little more nice. So liberals, are a little more loud, make a little more noise. They seem to be the majority sometimes in our state, but I don't think that they are. But you take a state like Oklahoma, you take a state like, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Nebraska, North Dakota, South Dakota, Idaho, right, Montana, all these states where you have, 60 to 70% of the population, 60 to 70% of the legislators pro-life. What are they doing? These are states that if they all with a collective voice stood up and said, Roe versus Wade was gross judicial activism. Obergefell
Well, even
gross
if we just had
judicial
one
activism.
governor willing to do this, and I think we would get one if he knew that he could count on the church to back him up.
Great point. Great point. And
That's the thing.
That's it. Yeah, and would be. And so that's what we've been working on. A, we need to awaken the church to our duties, and two, we need to then flex that political muscle to see to it, because we're good at winning elections. We got Reagan in, we got Bush in, we got Trump in, right? I mean, it's largely evangelical Christians that were attributed with all those victories. And so, Walker, even just our recent Supreme Court decision with Brian Hagedorn, is largely evangelical Christians flexing their political muscles, right? And so, now go ahead.
Why do you think it is, Jason, that the church is so silent on this issue?
Well, the old saying of fog in the pulpit is a mist in the pew, right? Pastor Mark Gungor from up in Green Bay, runs the Laugh Your Way to a Better Marriage seminar, well-known pastor for his marriage counseling. Mark Gungor said this on national television. He said the highest concentration of effeminate men in this country is behind the pulpit. And what an indictment, right? So, our churches have become emasculated, sadly. Too many of them. I work construction, right? I'm on a construction site right now, so I'm out here. I've been swinging a hammer today, and so, there's a lot of good men in this country, but those good men are for a large part, they're good not necessarily because of what they've received at church. And a lot of them, their masculinity is not welcome in the church. They're made to feel, put out. Check your masculinity at the door. And so, church has become largely a place where effeminate men seek very comfortable jobs in a very safe religious atmosphere where they can really nurture and cater to women and children. And our churches are 65% female. And if you factor in women and children, it's 80% women and children. And if you look at all the ministries in most evangelical churches, 80% of the ministries that exist in the church are led by women. So if a man comes in and wants to do something manly and says, I want to come in here and serve, what do I do? There's this evil going on in our nation. There's this corruption and crime in our streets. There's corruption in our government. There's people that need to hear the gospel. Let's go and let's do something. What's going to happen to that guy?
You're given the boot. I can tell you exactly what happens.
You're told to settle down. You're ruffling feathers. You're making people uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And so
we don't politicize the pulpit, and we don't talk about that here.
Correct. And so we need a revival of godly masculinity, and that needs to start in our pulpits. It needs to be in the pews. It needs to infect all levels of society. Abortion really ultimately is a man's issue, as much as they say it's a woman's issue. Abortion is a man's issue. It was 7 men that gave us abortion on the Supreme Court, right? Every state that legalized abortion prior to Roe versus Wade, there were 7. Every single one of those, it was a male governor and almost all male legislatures. The police, the chief of police, the county sheriffs who are overseeing all the cities where abortion clinics operate, these are all men. Right? So it was men that gave us abortion. Not to mention
Well, and it's men that are supposed to be protecting and defending women and children.
Well, that's exactly right. That's
So,
exactly right. So not only are half the babies being killed men, we were all babies in the womb at one time, but it's men who've been given the protective responsibility over women and children. And so it's our duty to protect these little babies. It's our duty to protect our women. It's our duty to be faithful and to these commandments of the Lord. So, yeah, it's a man's issue. So we need a revival of godly masculinity, strong men who recognize their protective duties and who are willing to hazard their lives for the gospel. Men who follow in the footsteps of Jesus Christ, take up their cross, bear the burden, bear the reproach, seek God's strength and courage and wisdom, and walk in that. That's what we need. We need those kind of men at all levels of society. We especially need them as governors to stand up to these abuses of the federal government, and to put an end to this killing and the proliferation of evil in our society, the decadence. You look at the entertainment industry, what's being fed our young people, pornography, all this stuff. We need godly men who protect their daughters, who protect their sons, who protect their communities, and say, no, you're not going to proliferate this filth in our community. We're not going to sit idly by and say this is just normal, that you want to prey upon our children. We need to stand up and speak against this evil and take substantive action to see it end. And
absolutely.
So that's what we need to be preaching. Amen.
Yep. We are running down here to the last few minutes. I would encourage everyone to get on board with Missionaries to the Preborn. That is missionariestothepreborn.com. And Jerry's looking that up for us. We can show that. And then you guys also do a monthly tour stop.
Yes. The third Saturday of the month. We'll start up in March next month. Or well, this is March. So next month, April. We weren't able to do it this month because of this coronavirus stuff. So hopefully next month, the third Saturday of every month, we get out on the streets somewhere around the Metro Milwaukee area.
Right. So, how are things in Milwaukee? You mentioned the coronavirus.
Coronavirus.
I'm coming down there tomorrow, so I'm kind of curious.
Okay. Good note. Well, there's no rush hour. You don't have to worry about rush hour traffic.
Yeah, that's one good thing.
We're just working. We're just continuing to work. A lot of people are just continuing to work. A lot of uncertainty. And I think the government, I think the media has certainly sensationalized this, created a lot of hysteria. And I think, government does what government does, right? They tend to exploit any crisis to expand their power.
But there are some good things coming out of this.
There are.
There are not going to be any pride parades this summer, I would doubt.
Hope not.
And
public schools are all shut down.
A lot of public schools are closed. A lot of idols are coming down. There's no professional.
I lost you. I don't know if you can hear me, but I lost you, Rob. Yeah, I would just end on the note, I guess, that he was talking on. There's a lot of good things coming out of this. It's tragic that people are losing their lives over this virus, but I think there's also a lot of overreaction going on. I don't know. I think tanking the global economy is going to be disastrous for our society. I hope we don't do that. We want to practice safety, of course, but we don't want to overreact. And I think good things are coming out of it. Maybe people will slow down a little bit and reprioritize and think about the relationships that mean the most to them, and think about, spending time with their kids. And so hopefully some good things will come out of this slowing down our pace of life a little bit, and people can spend a little more time focused on their families and prioritizing what matters, a little more time focused on their relationship with God, and taking that more seriously. So, but we'll see. A lot of uncertainty. We'll see what happens in the next coming weeks and months. But ultimately, our trust is in the Lord, so we don't need to panic. We don't need to be afraid of anything other than God. All right, Rob, you're back?
Oh, yes, I am back. And we have probably about 20 seconds left of the show. I don't know what happened there.
He just gave the last word there.
Okay. Well, hopefully you filled in for us. Thank you, Jason, for being with us today, taking time out of your busy schedule. And,
thank you, Rob, and Lord bless you for your efforts. Hope to be able to get up there and join you soon.
Yeah. Oh, well, and I'll be seeing you guys before you know it. So
sounds
thanks.
Good.
Have
Look
a good
us up
day.
when you're in the city. Thank you.
Okay.
God
Bye-bye.
bless. Bye.
Yeah, you can close. I think we're set.